talking about the vampire horror comedy Blood Relatives, and this is written, directed and stars Noah Segan. Now Segan primarily has worked as an actor previously to this, a couple of other kind of credits here and there, but here he is doing the whole shebang in all the kind of like the creative fashions. And what's this movie about? Well, as I've mentioned, it's a kind of a horror comedy, but it's also a kind of coming-of-age drama, a road trip, and a little bit of commentary on absent parents. What's the story? Well, it focuses on Segan's character, who is a vampire who has been alive for decades, and he's a somewhat of a nomadic chap, really just travelling around America, really scratching out an existence, feeding on people when he can, trying to kind of target, you know, maybe horrible people, criminals, things like that, where he has to kill, but it doesn't always go to plan. And that's pretty much his existence. Now, things kind of come crashing to reality when he's confronted one day by a teenage girl who claims to be his daughter. And we soon learn that that is the case, and she actually has some vampiric abilities of herself, albeit not a fully formed vampire. So she's kind of like a hybrid, a little bit like Blade, I suppose. You can walk in the sunlight, things like that. And it's really the relationship between those two characters, and it kind of parallels struggles in kind of real life and between kind of parents. I think in the movie it's got a little bit to say about kind of single fathers, and maybe a little bit about kind of like that trope of men never really kind of wanting to, you know, be ready to put down roots, never kind of like thinking, oh, I'm not ready yet to settle down, I'm not ready yet to settle down. This guy's been, you know, essentially quasi-alive for decades, and he's still not ready to kind of like, you know, stand up to his responsibilities as a father and things like this, even though, you know, he spent decades trapped in a kind of a 35-year-old's body and things like this, and he's still questioning whether he's ready to do this or not. So that's kind of your movie. So it's not big on plot, to be honest with you. It isn't a movie where, you know, you've got some kind of interesting narrative that's going to kind of be kind of drawing you into lots of kind of twists and turns. It's more of a slice of life, more of a road trip, and really focusing on the characters of these two individuals and their relationship and how it evolves through the course of the movie. So what do I think work? Now, in a movie like this, I think obviously it has to, it's going to live or die on the strength of its characters and how they're portrayed and how they're written. And I'm pleased to say, for the most part, I think it does it pretty successfully. I found both these kind of characters pretty interesting. They're both somewhat kind of offish, I would say, and obviously nomadic to a certain degree, but you understand why that is, but they're still somewhat amenable to change. Certainly the teenage girl desperately kind of wants to find a connection with this guy who is, you know, her father and also kind of a vampire. You know, and for him, you know, he's obviously a little bit kind of reluctant initially, but the kind of the growing realization that ultimately this is kind of his legacy, kind of as the film goes on, obviously softens his kind of stance. And I kind of quite enjoyed it, and we get some kind of, you know, some fantastical things when they're doing like kind of vampire stuff together, but we also do more of the mundane stuff as well, where he's like teaching her how to drive and things like that. So I think it strikes a good balance here between being a kind of a supernatural drama and a light comedy. Now, let's talk about the tone of this movie a little bit, because this movie sits on very much of like an indie feel to it. It's not particularly horrific. It's not trying to be scary. It's not trying to be particularly kind of graphic or gory. There are actually a reasonable amount of kills in this movie, but you more or less see the aftermath. It's not about, you know, seeing vampires kill, you know, victims and things like that. It's more about the characters. And as far as the comedy sides of it, it's kind of more whimsical rather than kind of like laughing out loud and kind of rolling off your seat in hysterics and things like that. It's not trying to be particularly kind of funny, not trying to be particularly kind of like scary, but just have this kind of like more of a drama movie that's kind of like just has these kind of elements that it kind of goes into, really. So, leading on to the performances, I've got to say, I think the performances are pretty strong here. You know, angsty teenage girls, aloof kind of like nomadic kind of like male characters, might not seem the most affable characters, but I've got to say the actors here do a good job of making these characters interesting and engaging. We kind of get a slew of other characters in the movie as well, different kind of people who they're interactive, and you never quite know how it's going to kind of end up. Some, it doesn't end up particularly well for them. Some, you know, they seem, you know, perfectly fine and things like that. You know, they're a mixed bag in regards to the acting, but for the most part, I would say pretty good. Some are played a little broad, to be honest, but, you know, for the most part, the acting here, I think, is solid across the board. And I've got to say, it's an interesting kind of, like, character study, you know. And one thing I think this movie does do, and it's normally a complaint that I have, where the movie kind of tells you a lot rather than kind of showing you, you know. With films, as it's a visual medium, you want to show, not tell. Whilst this one, I think possibly down to budget reasons, that it can't really show you his story, you know, when he became a vampire and how it, you know, his family and things like that. But I think the movie does a good job here of being able to show you clues and little drop kind of hints here and there in conversation about, you know, his backstory, and I think it actually is pretty interesting. And even though it doesn't show you this stuff, and a lot of it ultimately is exposition, I have to say I was still quite interested in it, you know. And that's quite rare. Normally with a lot of these things, when you'll find that when you have an exposition dump, it's quite annoying. But here I actually found it woven into the story pretty well, and you know, it did not seem too intrusive, but also it's not too kind of just spoon-fed to you. It's kind of like given to you in chunks, and it's up to you to kind of piece together the bits there. So maybe what doesn't work, if I had to have like levy a one main complaint against this movie, the story here is incredibly light. It's not really about anything other than their kind of relationship. I mean, this movie doesn't have like a villain. It doesn't have a quest that they're trying to kind of get to. It doesn't have someone kind of chasing them or a MacGuffin. Nothing like that. It is just these two characters finding each other and kind of changing their ways to, you know, adapt to this kind of new status quo. That's the movie. It could have been not a vampire film, to be honest with you. It could have been just this kind of like this dad who has a daughter that turns up, and the crux of the story may have been very similar. So I think the story is a little bit light, to be honest with you. I was maybe expecting it to have a little bit more meat on the bones, you know, or it to have a more of a definitive ending, maybe. But it just kind of, you know, it's just kind of like a slice of life, really. But I think those of you who want a stronger narrative may be a little bit kind of perturbed by the fact that this movie doesn't particularly have a strong narrative thread. It's more of just a kind of, as I say, a character movie with these two people and how their characters change, and that is it. That is it. It could have lent more, I think, on maybe the horror side of it. I don't think it would have worked to kind of maybe up the comedy. The comedy they kind of got about right. It feels like, you know, as I say, somewhat whimsical, but not overly, not so it's unrealistic. I don't know. But the fact that this movie is about vampires, it seems inconsequential in a way, because you never really feel that that's a massive part of the story. It almost seems, why have it? You know, why not make this purely a drama about a single father meeting his daughter, that kind of stuff, and the vampire stuff is just kind of on the surface. And I would have liked to have seen, and maybe, to me it was like, this young girl, she has to come to, I mean, she didn't know this guy was a vampire until she more or less kind of like met him, or just before. And she doesn't seem like perturbed by it at all. She doesn't seem horrified by the fact that there's, you know, killing. I don't know, I would have maybe up to the dramatic stakes of that a little bit, maybe show a little bit more of the kind of the grisly side to this thing and what actually it means to kind of take a life. But it was more like the vampire stuff itself was more like just kind of window dressing, really. And it really just wanted to do a family drama that just happens to have the trappings of a vampire film. But it didn't lean enough in it. I think, why even have it? It introduces a couple of other kind of elements. There's a brief tease about a werewolf, which I would have avoided because I thought that scene was stupid, to be honest. And it kind of takes away from what seems like a special thing between these two, to introduce kind of other kind of supernatural characters, and it wasn't done particularly well and looked incredibly cheesy. That was a little not a particularly good choice to me. But in regards to the character growths of these individuals, that to me was strong. If you want to watch this for a good character piece, I do think that is worth a watch. You know, and I do appreciate good characters, and this does have that. And as such, I will give this an above average mark, because I do feel, you know, it's an engaging film with engaging characters. It's just that the story that they're involved in seems either not that interesting or somewhat superfluous in some ways, and didn't really need to be about vampires to a certain degree, because it never really takes that concept any further than window dressing. So it's a 6 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.